The laziest thing that you can do is really refuse to grow. You can be the most consistent person on your team. You can show up early, you can stay late, you can crush the numbers, right? But if you never challenge the way you think, if you never evolve and you're not driven, then you're just predictable, right? Laziness isn't always disengaging. Sometimes it's just misalignment. And mislabeling someone's redirection as laziness is really how we miss their breakthrough. I'll tell you what, lack of empathy, I would take a lazy person over somebody who had a lack of empathy and a lack of grace. I'll take that person. Give me the lazy person over the person who has no emotional intelligence because they don't have empathy and they have no grace. Sometimes it's just staying in the chapter of your life that's already over. And if you're scared to move on, to me, that's lazy. You've lost the vigor of growth. You've lost the vigor of grasping opportunities. You ever look at someone and think, man, that guy's lazy, that it's not carrying their weight? What if I told you that laziness isn't necessarily about effort? It's more about resistance. You can show up to work every single day. You can clock in on time. You can hit your numbers. In some cases, you can exceed your numbers. And for all intents and purposes, be an extraordinary employee and still technically be the laziest person in the room. Stay with me, because the laziest thing that you can do is really refuse to grow. Welcome to Rewired Experience. This is the podcast where we turn stress into fuel and help people achieve their greatness. This episode, it might hit a nerve for a lot of. For me, it was a pressing thought. When I really dove into it as a concept to reshoot my azimuth, to redetermine my purpose, my why, to change my perspective on something that I really thought I understood. Now look, this episode, it might be emotionally triggering to you. It might really press on you in a way that's uncomfortable. And so I hope it does that in a positive way, because that means you're alive. That means that you're at least open to change, to transition. And that's really what we're about. We're about becoming the best version of yourself for others. And then the expectation that others are going to become the best version of themselves for you. And I think that's the ultimate in individual responsibility, and understanding that through those disciplines, we have the best opportunity to make an impact in this world. So if you're new here, my name's Kyle Stoy. I'm a retired police officer, 20 years, did 12 years on SWAT, did 100 combat missions in Afghanistan, and I hit an IED in Afghanistan, and that effectively ended my career, not just in the military, but ultimately in law enforcement. But there's a podcast that I did. It was really on the moment that broke me. I don't remember the exact title off the top of my head, but I'll link it down in the description. And that was an episode where I described the moment where I decided that I was done with law enforcement, that I was ready to move on to the next chapter of my life. And it wasn't a moment that you thought it might be, or that I guess that might be typically thought of as something that would be like a straw that broke the camel's back type moment. This moment was a domestic call. There was an 18-month-old baby. The parents were like screaming at each other. The baby found peace when I picked him up. He didn't know me. He was crying. I picked him up, and when I picked him up, he stopped crying. And that moment for me, realizing that baby found peace in that comfort, in the calm, in the storm, made me realize that I needed a calm in my storm. And that moment, it shifted a lot of things for me. And so I want to talk about real quick what happened in that moment. I talked about how that was the moment where I wanted to move on in that other podcast. But what I want to talk about is how I responded to that moment. Is I really stopped being the go-getter, right? Like the person that for most of my career, there's definitely ups and downs. And those ups and downs were more associated with where I was in my personal life and then how that reflected on my professional life. And we can talk about what that meant for work ethic. I get that. Like my work ethic definitely suffered in those moments. But the word that was thrown around mostly was lazy. And so I really want to talk about lazy, right? And what that means. We think laziness is about doing nothing, right? Like typically sitting around or avoiding work or maybe avoiding putting out maximum effort. But the real laziness isn't really about that. And really by definition, and we'll look at that here in a second, it's really about resisting growth, resisting moving on to the next chapter. We can use the word evolution. We could throw a lot of different words into that, however you want to look at it. But really what it's about is, like I said, resisting the uncomfortable and resisting the new. That is a much better contrast for what the word lazy actually means. You can be the most consistent person on your team. You can show up early, you can stay late, you can crush the numbers, right? But if you never challenge the way you think, if you never evolve and you're not driven, then you're just predictable, right? There's something to be said for consistency, but if consistency is all you have, it's not a bad trait. Like consistency is amazing. But what I'm saying is at some point, you're just resisting the next evolution of you. And so you can show up out of habit and do the same things comfortably. Even if those things are challenging to other people, at some point they're comfortable to you. And if you just continue to do those things over and over and over again, then that's literally the definition of lazy. In the sense that you're not challenging anything. You're just showing up or there's nothing that you're doing that's challenging, that's growing you, that's making you a better person, a better contributor to the team. You're just doing the same thing every day in and day out. That's great. You're dependable. You're consistent. But you can still be lazy. And that's the thing that I think might be emotionally triggering to a lot of people. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but think about this. If good is truly the enemy of great, it's a book by Jim Collins. Good is the enemy of great is the quote in the book, From Good to Great. Then if you're refusing to go from good to great, then that's the definition of lazy. But here's the thing. I think a lot of times when we look at somebody and we go, that person's lazy, I think what they really might be is uninspired. So in law enforcement, especially in the military, I think in a lot of public service type things that are under like first responder umbrella, like firefighters, EMS, law enforcement, I think you see this in caregivers, like people in the medical profession, things like that. We call it burnout. It's this emotional disconnection with purpose that kind of happens over time, whether that's caused by trauma or just literally what the word says, burnout, because you're tired, you feel underappreciated. So you've lost some vigor in what you're doing and you stop really putting out extra effort, so to speak. So when you look at my situation, I was in combat, 100 combat missions, IED in Afghanistan. I was classified as a limb salvage, so almost lost my leg, had to undergo surgeries, a long road of recovery, made it back to law enforcement as a full-time police officer. Now I was put in a desk job initially at the training center. Great time in my career, especially for the position that I was in, because I was able to still feel like I was contributing, right? Still feel like I was making a difference. I was working at the training center as a full-time trainer. So I was still able to help out with SWAT training. I helped run the academies, had a great role, a significant role in building our academy structure because it was pretty new at that time. Had an amazing lieutenant that was a phenomenal leader, gave me the latitude to create and make an impact in that sector of the law enforcement community. Everybody wanted me to come back to the SWAT team. I was doing what I could to recover, and that was a part of what I was passionate about. But I spent about 4 years at the training center, loved it. But really for my own ego, I had to go back to patrol. At that time, I think I accepted that maybe my career's over, right? And I could have stayed at that desk job. But I think really for my own ego, I was like, I just want to get back to patrol to say that I did. And I think the only way I thought if there was ever a shot in hell that I'd make it back to SWAT, it would be through patrol. Like, I'd have to go back to patrol, right? In order to prove myself in those tense, uncertain, rapidly evolving circumstances that this perceived physical limitation wasn't necessarily something that everybody needed to worry about, right? So it was important for me to do that. And I did that. And when I first came back to the street, I did have that vigor. I did have that drive to go out and be a go-getter and have high self-initiated activity, right? And go out and catch the bad guys again. And the first thing that happened that affected my want to was like one of my first days on the street, I got a complaint from a citizen and they came down pretty hard on me. And I didn't think it was deserved. I took the punishment with grace. I was like, okay, whatever. It was where I had raised my voice to a citizen that was driving under a power line. They were inside the car with their windows up, and I raised my voice. And maybe it was the look on my face, but it was offensive to the citizen, and the citizen complained on it. And so I actually got paper hung on me for raising my voice outside of a sealed up car that was driving under a downed power line that was arcing with electricity. I thought I was preventing that person's from being injured and ended up getting an administrative admonishment of sorts, not a huge deal, but it definitely affected my want to, my purpose, right? Like the being inspired to do the job. And so that was the first thing that happened. And then I had the incident that I just described to you guys about with the baby, where I just had this moment of clarity that I think I had just had enough. Here's the thing, like, I wasn't just going to quit that day. I didn't walk into the chief's office and say, I'm going to retire. I didn't call the pension and go, hey, I'm ready to hang it up. There were things I had to do to start moving in that direction. And my wife and I think at that point had already, or were about to, I feel like we started the business just shortly after these incidents. Not too long after that. And that's why I was open to it. When the business opportunity presented itself, I was open to it because I'd already had these things come crashing down on me and made the decision that I was done, right? Now, like I said, there've been seasons where I was quote unquote could be perceived as lazy because I had things going on in my personal life. And I'm not proud at all of how I responded, right? In terms of, I did really slow my output. I wasn't out there actively looking for the bad guy to write a bunch of tickets or to take people to jail or any of those things. I just did the minimum that I had to do, called it good, because emotionally, I was already moved on. A lot of people looked at me as being lazy. And like I said, I knew in my heart that going back to patrol was probably a temporary thing. And again, maybe that was my ego, right? Like maybe either way, whether I was looking at it as this is going to be a temporary thing because I'm going to make it back to SWAT or some other position within the department, or this is going to be a temporary thing because I'm going to hang it up. No, definitely there was something that was tugging at me just to go back, just say that I did, right? And not be stuck in this desk job. That was an awesome position, and I was probably very well suited for it. But like I said, my ego didn't feel like that's where I should stay. So when that moment broke me with the 18-month-old baby, I knew I was done. And It wasn't that I was lazy, I was just emotionally bankrupt. But from the outside looking in, when you're being judgmental, when you're judging others, this is where laziness can look a lot like burnout and vice versa. If you're in perception and you're not actually in perspective, right, then burnout looks a lot like laziness. And if you don't take the time to talk to that person, to get their perspective, and I did. I had a great lieutenant who sat me down and said, "Hey man, this isn't you. What's going on?" I just didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know how to say it. And he asked me what I needed, but honestly, I didn't know how to tell him what I needed. Because what I needed, I don't think anybody could have given it to me. I needed purpose. I needed to move on. And I think there were some people at high levels of the department that saw that and respected it, because I did end up going back to the training center for kind of the end of my career. And I think they saw what I contributed there, and they're like, we had purpose there. Let's put him back in that position, because he was pretty good at it. When I was checked out, and this is the part that nobody saw, when I was checked out, I was pouring my energy, every waking moment I had, into personal growth, into understanding what it meant to become the best version of myself for everyone else. And that took a lot of energy. Not only that, but I started learning the lexicon, the tactical and technical aspects of this new career field that I was diving into as an entrepreneur. I was reading, I was growing, I was building something at the time that actually aligned with my purpose. I didn't have much left to give to what I didn't believe in anymore. But that doesn't mean I wasn't giving. It just means that I was redirecting. Laziness isn't always disengagement. Sometimes it's just misalignment. And mislabeling someone's redirection as laziness is really how we miss their breakthrough. And I think that's something really important to understand when it comes to being emotionally intelligent, especially as a leader. And I do think some of my leaders saw that, but some didn't. And like I said, there's people that were accusing me of being retired on duty. I had a supervisor, that same supervisor, and he meant well. And I understand really what he was saying. He told me, he was like, "You're sullying a decorated career." And my response when he said that was probably not the best way to articulate it, but I meant it. I said, I don't care. Because the quote-unquote legacy of what I had done in law enforcement was already written. And in my mind, I was like, if a few months of not being at my best can sully 20 years of mostly giving my all and sacrificing with 2 failed marriages and injuries and service to my country, to my community, decorations, accommodations. If the last few months is what's really going to define my career, then I did a pretty crappy job anyway. Like, I understood what he was trying to say, but I was like, you just don't understand emotionally where I am. And I had no idea how to articulate that. And unless somebody was in my mind, in my heart, they would not understand that. And the reason I'm telling you this is because be careful with your perception. Don't be so irresponsible with your perception that you can't take the plank out of your own eye, that you lack empathy. I'll tell you what, lack of empathy, I would take a lazy person over somebody who had a lack of empathy and a lack of grace any day. I'll take that person on my team. Give me the lazy person over the person who has no emotional intelligence because they don't have empathy and they have no grace all day long. Because I'll tell you, my experience with people who are quote unquote lazy, if you give them a task, most of the time, they'll find the most creative and the most efficient way to get it to work. Because most of the time, people are geared towards purpose. And if you give them a task that's maybe not their purpose, but they understand that they need to get it done, right? Like, they're going to find the easiest way to do it. They're going to find if you give them parameters, You give them the mission, task, and purpose, the outcome that you're looking for. As long as you clearly articulate that and then you make it time-bound, lazy people can get some stuff done because they don't want to waste unnecessary time on it. So, as a reflection, this is what I'd like you to do. Look, understand as I'm reflecting, right? There were days that I didn't give it my all, and I'm not proud of that. But what no one understood was that I was searching for something that mattered again. So I'd like for you to consider this. Where have you checked out? And not because you're lazy, right? Because your soul is looking for a new mission. Laziness isn't necessarily just hanging out, staying on the couch, right? Like, sometimes it's just staying in the chapter of your life that's already over. And if you're scared to move on, to me, that's lazy. You've lost the vigor of growth. You've lost the vigor of grasping opportunities. And you're just stuck in what's comfortable. You're doing what's comfortable because it's what you know. That's lazy. Doing the same thing over and over again because it's comfortable is lazy. If you're doing that and expecting a new result, then it's insanity. Laziness can be showing up every day to something that doesn't grow you because growth would require change, and change is uncomfortable. Most people are too lazy to learn a new language, a new framework, a new mindset. Sometimes the man climbing a new mountain, slower than the guy that's sprinting around in circles at the bottom of the mountain, is perceived as lazy. But the only one of them that's really going somewhere new is a guy that's climbing the mountain. And people on the ground are looking up going, where's that guy going? Why? Because they can't see the peak. They don't know where he's going. Remember to take the plank from your own eye before you pass judgment on somebody else for being lazy. Before you label something as lazy when they might just be in the middle of a new evolution. So ask yourself this, where are you resisting the discomfort of reinvention? There's a version of you that exists on the other side of your excuses, on the other side of uncomfortable. But you're never going to meet that person if you're too lazy to change. Don't let consistency become your cage. If you like this content, like I said, there's 2 episodes. Number 1 that I'd recommend. One of them, and I'll link it in the description, was about that moment that really broke the camel's back for me. But my second episode ever about reshooting your azimuth, reconnecting with purpose, defining your why. I'll link that one down in the description too. But look, if you're really committed to what I'm saying here, and maybe you're thinking to yourself, man, this makes a lot of sense. This might be why I feel stuck. Because, yeah, I do the thing every day. I do the deal consistently, but I'm not looking for growth. I'm avoiding growth because growth feels uncomfortable. If that's you, we have a great community of people who are in the same place. And we just launched this community, and I'll tell you what, I'm shocked. I'm shocked at how open people are to sharing where they are, how receptive they are to sharing it with others and offering the opportunity of growth to others by being vulnerable and empathetic, by giving grace to other people saying, hey, I was there once. This is what I did. And then implementing the take a knee, drink water, reshoot your azimuth, and Charlie Mike framework. Go to rewiredexperience.com. Any button you click on that website's going to take you to our little community, a little learning community. And the people in there are amazing. It's pretty small right now, like I said. But there's people in there really engaged in getting out of the suck and getting uncomfortable and redefining themselves. And some of these people may have been called lazy because they were lacking purpose. They were lacking the community that they found now, where they can be open, where they can be honest, where people aren't there with planks in their eye, right? They're there willing to listen. So I'll leave you with this. Where have you looked efficient? In your life, in your family, in your relationships? Where have you looked efficient in your job, in your business? You've just been comfortable. What I would challenge you in saying is maybe, just maybe, you're looking to move to a new chapter. And maybe people are looking at you as being super hardworking, but in your heart, you're broken because you know you're lazy. If that's where you are, then it's time to take a knee, drink water, reshoot your Azimuth, and Charlie Mike.